Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So in addition to kind of giving you guys some videos and some assignments from other teachers and other videos that people post on YouTube, I'm going to be making some of my own videos to kind of take you guys through some of the stuff that we would have been learning in class. So this is kind of the first example of that. And what we're going to focus on is the American economic system, our form of capitalism, which in the last video kind of got introduced to is really a mixed form of capitalism. And so what I want you guys to kind of pay attention to and try and take notes on is what about our economic system makes it mixed? What aspects are we taking from the total free market economy, the Adam Smith version of free market economics or pure capitalism? And what are we taking from like government controlled economic systems? What aspects are coming from the government? What aspects are government controlled or regulated? And what our aspects are kind of just pure consumer-based, laissez-faire kind of government style. So if you're taking a look here, we have, really from the 2016 election, we don't know who's going to be Donald Trump's opponent in the 2020 election yet. It could be Joe Biden, it could be Bernie Sanders. But most Americans, when we think of voting, we think of our political system. We think of what we learned about in government. So you think of like the 2016 election with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, or the future presidential election with Donald Trump and maybe Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders, or even maybe like lower government elections like congressional elections. Most Americans don't think that they vote every single day. They think that they vote once, most Americans once every 4 years. Some Americans who are more politically active, they vote once every year. They go and vote on election day every year. Very few Americans kind of think, well, you know what, I actually vote every single day of my life. And the truth is, you do. And so that's what we're going to start with today. And that I think is the first important concept to understand in our American system, is the role that you play as a consumer. And the first thing you want to understand, you want to write down, is that you vote every single day with your money. Okay, with the choices you make economically of what to buy and what not to buy. Now, when you buy something, you are essentially voting for that company. You are voting for not just the product they produce, but the company itself. So I want you guys to take a step back and think about what are some things that you take into account when you make a purchase. You have the price, of course. Everybody takes a look at the price. You might take a look at the quality of the product, the style of the product that you're buying. But people look at a whole host of other things when they buy a product as well. Some people, they care about where is the product made. So some people want to buy products that are made in America only. Some people, that's not a big deal to them. Other people, they might care about how do they treat their workers. So some people might say, well, you know what, I won't buy products from Walmart because I know that they don't treat their workers, or they don't give them above minimum wage, or they don't give them a health benefit plan. Some might say they'll take into account other aspects of it, like how environmentally friendly are they? How eco-friendly is the company? Do they pollute? There's so many different things that factor into why you purchase a product and what people think about. Some of them are conscious, some of them are not conscious. Some of them are, like, say for example, like brand recognition. Some people will buy only the store brand. Like me, I go into the grocery store, I'll buy the generic one. Like, I'll buy the generic Cheerios. I don't really care. But some people, they want to make sure that they buy the brand Cheerios or whatever it might be, that product. And so, like, the first thing you want to understand is when you do spend money, you're essentially voting for that company and the product that they've created. And so, like, you have a lot of power in our economic system. You have the power to support a company or not support a company. And I think you've probably noticed this a little bit lately, that a lot of people have become more politically active, I guess, in their form of capitalism, and whether they want to support a company or they don't, depending on like their stances on different things. And that, I think, is an important aspect. Just the first thing to understand, that you as a consumer in our system, you really have a lot of power. And one example I can think of from, let's say, 15, 20 years ago to now, like when I go into the grocery store, you have a huge kind of section in the produce section of organic produced produce. If you went to the grocery store 20 years ago, that did not exist. There was no such thing as organic produce. And that's an example of consumers have this demand. They want to spend money on that type of product. And so therefore now it exists. And so like you play a big role in the types of products that are out there, and what is offered to you within our system. All right, now the second big concept to understand is this idea of consumer sovereignty. That you is kind of related to voting with your money, is that you as the consumer, you have the power. You basically are the king in our economic system, because companies will produce what you want them to produce collectively, not you personally, but collectively as a society. They will produce what you want them to produce, because if they don't, they're going to go out of business. They're trying to please the needs of the people. And so in a lot of ways, capitalism, or at least mixed capitalism, and democracy kind of work hand in hand, because it gives a lot of power to the individual people, and collectively the people within the society. So you may have heard this kind of, I guess, kind of builds off the last thing. You may have heard this phrase, the consumer is always right. Now, what it doesn't mean, it does not mean that, or excuse me, not the consumer, the customer is always right. What it doesn't mean is that, like, if a customer comes back and they're complaining about some aspect of the product, that no matter what, you have to appease them if you're like somebody who works in retail. What it really means economically is that the customer is always right in their preferences. Meaning, let's say you stock a certain color of shirts. Say you stock, green shirts, and nobody's buying the green shirts, but they are buying the black shirts, right? What that shows you is that as a consumer or a customer, you're correct. What you got, what is demanded by the people, is what businesses will ultimately produce. And so that's really what they mean when they say the customer is always right. It's the customer's preferences are right. Because in our system, the customer kind of drives production and drives what companies will make. Okay, so we're going to kind of take on the flip side now. So that's kind of like the consumer side. Now we're going to take a look at the business side. So in our system, right, we have a form of capitalism. It's a mixed form of capitalism. And so we're going to talk about like what role does business play in kind of like facilitating what's produced, and like how the economy runs. So first thing to understand is this whole idea of free enterprise. So one of the major principles of our system is the ability to start your own business. Okay? Now, that's something that's, I think, key to understanding what makes, let's say, for example, our economic system different than a lot of more traditional economies that came before, let's say, the 1700s, 1800s, is that you as just an average citizen can open up a business. And, for the most part, I mean, this cartoon is kind of poking fun at the fact that you have a lot of different regulations, and like you have to get different permits in order to engage in the free enterprise system. But the possibility is there that you can open up your own business. You can be a small business owner, and you can kind of be a part of the market. And for a lot of Americans, that was a lot of Americans' dream, was to kind of be able to run their own business. You could be your own boss. You can, make your own profits, and you don't have to work for somebody else. You don't have to have a connection necessarily in the government in order to be able to open up a business. And that's how it worked in a lot of that's how it works in a lot of command economies. You have to have some kind of government connection in order to open up business. In more traditional economies, let's say, for example, like the Middle Ages from European society, you had to have a connection with the king or the queen in order to be able to be a merchant or open up business. You couldn't just do it on your own. And so one key principle that we have is that you do have the ability to have private ownership of businesses, and the idea that anybody could try to jump into the market as long as they have the capital in order to do it. All right, the second big thing you have to understand from the business side is that profit drives what they create, what they produce, and that's the idea of profit motive. Why a product is out there is because somebody who's that business person believes that you can make a profit off of selling that product. If you can't make a profit, even if it's a vital product, essentially it's not going to be produced. And so there's good and bad things to that. So like profit kind of drives the production and kind of drives our system. So the good thing to that is that they're trying to constantly meet the demands of the public, and they'll give the public what they want because that is what kind of drives their incentive and drives the ability to make money as a company. The drawback to this whole idea, I guess, of profit motive is that sometimes it can be kind of wasteful, as in what's produced for the society. The other thing is that sometimes vital things don't necessarily get produced because they don't produce a profit. So a really good example of that would be, let's say, like in the 1920s and 1930s, America is starting to build an electrical grid. So they're starting to electrify. And what I think a lot of us don't realize is that really only happens in big cities, because in big cities, people live clustered together, and therefore an electric company can make a profit by stringing electrical lines in a city like New York City. But in more rural areas, even though electricity would be a great benefit and people wanted electricity in more rural areas, companies wouldn't provide it because it didn't really, it wasn't profitable. People live too far apart in order for it to be profitable. So, like in modern day America, an example of that would be the internet. So you guys live in a city where we're wired for fast-paced internet because it's profitable for a company to do it because of the number of consumers they have within, let's say, New York City. But if you go to a more rural area, again, they don't necessarily have high-speed internet. So for example, I think I've told you guys, I have a farm upstate, and in my farm upstate, they do not have high-speed internet. They are just now starting to try and build a grid, and it's not done by a for-profit company. It's a cooperative company of the people who live up there trying to get high-speed internet for the area. And so I think it's kind of an interesting thing or just an important thing to understand, that profit is kind of what drives things. And sometimes when it's not profitable, companies won't do it. And that's sometimes when the government steps in or the citizens try to step in and form cooperative organizations to try and do something for a non-profit kind of motive or cause. Okay, now the last thing that's very important here in our system and kind of drives it is the idea of competition, right? In order for like the system really to work well in a free enterprise, free market economy, you have to have multiple companies in any given industry to compete against one another. And so this kind of helps the consumer because it essentially regulates the price. And so you guys probably remember learning about, let's say, the Gilded Age in American history, where you have monopolies and trusts kind of like taking out competition, and that kind of hurts the consumer. So in like pure capitalist system, competition is what kind of regulates a lot of the problem. So we don't really have a pure capitalistic system. We have the government kind of stepping in and regulating it. But competition kind of plays a major role in setting a groundwork for a good system for the consumer and a safe system for the consumer. Now, one of the things I think is really interesting is a question to ask yourself is, do we have real competition in the United States? We have a lot of different brands, but do we actually have competition? So something that you may or may not be aware of, a lot of American companies are formed into what's called conglomerates. Meaning a lot of the companies that you think are competing against one another are actually owned by the same parent company. So this is showing you, this is television, showing you like the Time Warner Company and all the other television networks that they own. So if you see, they actually own quite a few television networks, and it's really owned by the same company. So to a consumer, it's the illusion of competition, but it's not really necessarily true competition. I'm going to zoom in for you guys in different things. This is showing you food. So food is pretty wild because if you look at it, if you go into the grocery store, it's really only a handful of parent companies that produce really all of the different food products and like brands within the supermarket. So if you zoom in, you can kind of see some of the different parent companies and what they own. And it's fascinating because a lot of times like products that you think are competing against each other are actually owned by the same parent company. And if you look in really small on the print of a lot of these, let's say the candy bars or different products, it'll always have the parent company, but they keep the label of, let's say, another company, and it kind of gives the illusion of competition. Okay, we're going to stop there. So that kind of gives you like an overview of our American mixed economic system and some of the key principles that is a part of our